Hello and welcome back everyone. Today I want to talk about plastic design in the realm of wargaming figures by going through a little bit of what happened in the past and what we may try to attempt to do in the future. This is the earliest Games Workshop plastics that I owned. These are Drastic Plastic Orcs. I want to say they came out around 1985. A couple of separate heads. You could twist them a little bit when you glued them on. Some arms that glued on separately. Not a lot of details on it, rather plain cloth. And I have to say that this was some painting that I did when this painting is 40 years old, 30 years old, something like that. It's old painting. So this was the first. Around 1988, with the release of Warhammer 3rd Edition, Fantasy Regiments was released, and these figures came with heads and bodies separate. You got 6 different army troops in one sprue, and what you could do is trade with your buddies and get rid of, say, your dark elf and trade for the goblin, and there you would have more of what you wanted. These were about 60 figures, I think you got 10 sprues of 60 figures for $10 to $15. This would have been about 1988, and these figures aren't horrible. There's some of them still in my armies to this day. Let me show you some examples here. This particular regiment has a couple of Fantasy Regiments Orcs right in the front rank there. A couple more in the back here are Hero Quest era Orcs. Throw them all together and you have a regiment. I had to put in one big doofer from 6th edition to round the unit out. This is one of the goblins still in my army, and they don't look too bad. You paint them up, put them on the table. They were really cheap troops. I think that they hold up pretty decent to this day. Around the era of 1988, a board game came out called Battle Masters, and in it was quite a few plastic figures. They were designed by Games Workshop, but the game was published by Milton Bradley. And these figures are very simple to build. They're one piece, but you could really bulk up a decent Empire army quickly. The shield is attached to this figure, and so they had to fill the back of this in with solid plastic in order that there wasn't an undercut. They had the slaughter bases. I never really liked slaughter bases. That was pretty decent. They also came out with a couple other Milton Bradley collaborations, such as Hero Quest and Advanced Hero Quest, and they would come with a variety of figures in them. So this is, I don't know, leading up to late 80s and early 90s. These figures aren't bad. I mean, they're just good, solid, chunky figures. They won't break easily. They have enough detail that you can paint. And people back then were mortal. They didn't paint the way the gods paint today. In something like this, you would just put some paint on it and you'd have some decent little figures. But yeah, these were the figures that came in the board games back in the early days. In 1992, this is copyright 1992, this was what came in the 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle starter box. This was about the time that I took a break from Games Workshop and played almost exclusively Advanced Squad Leader and WRG for, I want to say, almost a decade. But I have a lot of these figures, and I don't think these are bad at all. They're nice little figures, one piece, shield to glue on. There's nothing at all wrong with these. These are nice sprues that they put up with. It's interesting, you can see here where the parting line went up and down, and they followed it along because this goes up. Organic parting lines are tricky, but they can be done. You can see where the parts were ejected here, and then around here. There wasn't an extreme amount of ejector pins on this, and these were available pretty cheap at the time because they came in the starter set, and not a lot of people played Orcs and Goblins. You could get the Goblins for almost, well, they were throwing them away. This was the Elf Spearman that came in the 4th edition starter box set. I have some of these on a sprue somewhere too, but these are the ones that are painted up that are in my High Elf army. The 4th edition set also came with some High Elf archers. Again, this is a one-piece mold, and because it's relatively flat, the guy's looking to the side, his arm is up to the side, it made a pretty nice simple parting line. And one of the tricks you do is this little cloak that hangs around their legs really kind of helps simplify the part that goes up between their legs. So that would have been 1992 with the 4th edition starter set. This sprue here has 1993 on it. And this would have been what they were selling as one-piece models to bulk out your regiments back then. These are a little chunkier than a lot of the metal Skaven that I have from this era, but they're not bad figures. It's curious to me that they repeated the Skaven 4 times, but they changed the shield. I don't know why they didn't just put 4 different poses in. So that's a 1993. Here's some figures from 1994. And you can see this curious array that they did here with 4 separate little runners connected together to make one large runner. I think they did the same thing here. If I remember correctly, this came with 2 other guys down here, and you got this. A lot of dead space in here. I'm going to show you a later sprue, and they did a much better job of laying it out and designing it. They have an ejector pin here, and this is one of the little tricks that I sometimes do. You see this little nub just hanging off there. They're ejecting on the runner, of course, and they're ejecting here, but for some reason they wanted to put an ejector there, and they just added a little nub on the side. I do that a lot too, because when I design things I have to be aware of the fact that I can only push 1.9 cubic inches of plastic. So all of this plastic running around here is wasted, particularly on something like this, because they put a runner around each one. So you could run out of plastic on just the runner. But by doing a trick like this, you still get the effect of having an ejector pin without having to run extra plastic down there. So that just saves a little plastic. So that was 1994. Okay, next up is 5th edition starter set. Again, I didn't play 5th edition. Games Workshop 1996. Their starter set now has multi-piece figures in, but not that many pieces. You just had a head, an arm that went to the body. The bodies all look identical. I think they're identical, but the arms are different with different weapons. The shields are different, and the heads are different. So you have some heads yelling, some different types of heads. So you get a little bit of variety, and you can move the arm up and down, although you can't pivot it. And I guess you could twist the head a little bit, but it can't really look from left to right. But this is 5th edition starter set. It also came with some Bretonnians, which I don't have because I didn't buy this starter set. I got this in a trade sometime later on. Injecting in here, running along the sprue, there's a bit of a dimple here. I put them in, and the hard tip on the end of the nozzle that cools falls down in there and gets trapped, and that gets it out of your way so it doesn't run down and get clogged somewhere else. Not an extraordinary number of ejector pins. When you think about it, there's one here, 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 and there on this sprue. So it's pretty simple. They have chunky ejector pins. It's a pretty nice little sprue, but this was 1996, so that's 5th edition starter set. Moving up to 6th edition starter sets, they included some one-piece orcs in that set. They weren't all the same. This guy has slightly different pose with his weapons than this particular guy. They also made it so that the multi-part kits that they made fit in really well. This was the multi-part orc kit that came out roughly the same time. Let me see what it says on here. 1998, so it would have been 2 years after the 5th edition. This would have been 1998 when this came out. And 6th edition, I got back into it because of some gentlemen at the local store. These are, multi-part pieces, but they mixed really well with the single pose things. But these guys were getting larger and larger. The orcs had grown in stature compared to the previous orcs, and it made it hard to rank these guys up. But they were still somewhat usable. And then the Empire guys, I thought, were pretty nice. You had a one-piece gunner, and the spearman, I believe, was 2 pieces. You would put his weapon in. These aren't bad figures. They're just standard Empire troops. If we compare them to the Battle Masters guy, they're not horribly wrong. The 6th edition guy is a little taller and he's a little bit chunkier, but they're not extremely bad. They're, you know, the scale creep is noticeable, but it's not terrible. And 6th edition is an era when the multi-part kit became commercially available for many of the troops. This was one of the earlier, I think Elves came out pretty soon after the 6th edition dropped. These kits, I think, are some of the best kits from the Warhammer era because of what you got in that. So you had legs, you glue the torsos on, you could twist the torsos for posing. You had arms that you would glue on. Each of these arms could be moved a little bit. You then glued the other arm on with the shields, which are right here. Put the shield on you want, and you could then glue the head on. So each guy was moving his arms slightly differently. And even though they were a regiment that was ranked up, it really made it look that they were varied quite well. And at $20 for a box of 16, they weren't really that bad. I mean, they were nice figures, and it's a shame they discontinued all of them. So moving on to 7th edition, I believe it was called Skull Pass, and this is one of the Night Goblins. I'm actually painting all these up. I really like these little Night Goblins. They're nice and small, and I like these guys better than the 6th edition multi-pose goblins because they're actually had grown quite a lot. And this really was it was an interesting thing to me because the single piece models can hold their weapon and shield quite, you know, you can tuck them in. Whereas the guys where each arm is separate, it's almost like they're holding their arms out like they have poison ivy in their armpits and it's irritating them. You can't really get a natural pose. You can get all kind of poses, but they're all kind of a variation of, you know, arms out to the side. But yeah, these are the Skull Pass goblins. It came with this nice little piece of scenery that you can put together. And there were some dwarves in there. Here's one of them. And he was quite small also. I thought that was interesting that 7th edition, starter set at least, the figures were nice and small. They were getting back to a more traditional scale with them. So that was 7th edition. And then 8th edition, I didn't buy the starter box. I should have, but I didn't really see the need to buy the Skaven. So this is a horse from 8th edition, and I want to show you something kind of remarkable here. This is a 4th edition horse, and this is an 8th edition horse. And other than the fact that this guy is really fancy with a lot of extra stuff flowing in the breeze, they don't look terribly out of scale to each other, and they can rank up. So that was sort of interesting to me. Now, if I compare that to something that I picked up recently called the Venari Dawn Riders. Here, these guys, Venari Dawn Riders. I put one horse together and realized that I have to sell this set off on eBay because they don't rank up. The horse is just too big. The rump of this horse is as tall as the head of this horse. They can't possibly rank up because they'll be hanging out all around the base in all directions, and the horse won't rank up. It's a shame. They're really nice figures, but you know, it's clear to me that the company is not really interested in, they're not really interested in the older gamers like us. We're kind of on our own out here, so if we want any figures, we got to make them ourselves or something. But it's interesting, this sprue design, to study it. This is, you know, a work of art. They have a dual injector, so they have a dual nozzle plastic machine, so they're shooting in two shots at one time there, which is interesting because you can make a bigger sprue, but you don't have to, the plastic doesn't have to go as far. You'll notice that it's much more efficient use of space as opposed to something like this from 1994. We had all of this space here wasted. Or even this. This is the 1996. And if you look at the size of this sprue, yeah, granted it's smaller, but there are 4 infantrymen on here, and that's it. This has 2 cavalrymen on here. you know, horses and everything. And it's not like they made it simple. The horses have an outer covering, legs that are separate that get glued in. The guy has a front and back torso, you know, arms and legs. And this kit, look at this. The reins here are separate. It's a very, very complicated kit. I would give them a 10 out of 10 on technical expertise. I give them a 1 out of 10 on getting the thing the right size. To me, I don't understand that. But, you know, they did what they did, and they just made these absolutely beautiful figures unusable for anyone who has an older army. So, okay, so that's Games Workshop from the beginning up through. Let me take a look. There are some other companies that dabbled in it. Fantasy Warriors was put out by Grenadier in the early 90s. This looks like a Nick Lund sculpt to me. And he made these dwarves for it, and I believe it also came with some, I want to say orcs. I gave all these figures to my nephews, and I don't know how I wound up with this one guy left over, but you know, they were plastic. Fantasy Warriors came out, and it was an interesting rule set, but it never caught on in my area. So that was that. And the other company that kind of came along, I don't know the year, but it's been some time ago that Wargames Factory entered the wargaming market with stuff made in China. A gentleman from New England went there and began, you know, securing their services. Once again, you know, they're ejecting. What do I say? Ejecting. They're injecting the plastic in there. They have a lot of ejector pins, very, very tiny ejector pins here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18 on this little area of the mold. So that's a very, very busy mold. I would say their technical expertise is probably really, really high, although their knowledge of the wargaming market may be less so. This is an interesting design. This guy is gripping the bow, and his hand is part of the bow. This hand is open, and this hand is open, and then you just had a weapon that you would glue into the hand, and it gives you more flexibility for what weapon you're going to glue into the hand. But then the guy looks like he's holding a coffee cup. The legs are on here. This is a free sample that they gave out of their historical Persians at one convention that I attended years ago. I used to go to conventions. I haven't been there in a decade, I would say. Maybe less than a decade, but I don't really go. This is some of the ones that I purchased for fantasy. These are the Wargames Factory orcs. Again, you got the open hands, torsos, and legs. So you get 3 guys per sprue, heads, different weapon options here. And when you put them together, they don't look like orcs, but they really look like 3rd edition half orcs. They actually kind of look like the drawings from the army book. And I always loved those little pen and ink drawings. I believe they were by a gentleman named Paul Bonner. I could be wrong. But this makes a nice half orc regiment. And because everything is separate, even though it's extremely painstaking, trimming everything and gluing it together, everybody is slightly different. So that's a regiment that I'm going to paint up for half orcs. Let me show you another regiment of theirs. This is an army that I purchased years ago at a substantial discount. I think about the time that Wargames Factory started, I guess they were losing interest in the market. So I got these at a huge discount. I figured I'd use them for a Nippon army at some point. But this is an interesting sprue study as well. One of the things that's interesting about what they do is they stack the sprues so that you can see that there's these little trees or little posts that fit into these sockets up here, and they all stack on top of each other. Interesting sprue layout again. Shooting in the middle here. Not a ton of ejector pins, but there's a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have an ejector pin like next to each head. But this is where it's kind of peculiar with this set. You have right and left legs, which made parting the legs much easier. And for this particular style of armor, I guess it was possible to do that, but it's a lot of gluing together. You get enough to build 5 bodies on each sprue, but you have to glue their legs together. 3 of the torsos are torsos. The other 2 torsos are front and back that have to be glued together. So these are the front, these are the backs here. hands with open hands, so you have to glue the weapon that you want into the hand. These are the spears. Spears are historically correct so that they're going to look very thin and fragile compared to historical, particularly the blade at the end. It's very fragile compared to what we would call a heroic 28mm scale spear. So again, this is when mic'd up and multiplied type 56 for 156 scale, this is a 2.8 inch round spear. This is a 3.9 round spear, and these orcs are rocking the 5.6. I may have said that before, but that's quite a lot. But these figures are very painstaking to build. But so where this leads me to is designing stuff, and what do I want to do, or do I even want to dabble with this? Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons why I thought there's no real point in it is because 3D printing. I had a 3D printer. I had access to tons of STL files, and I can design my own. But 3D printing has some drawbacks. Let me show you what 3D printing. These are some STL files I got off of Kickstarter. There was a group on Patreon called Artisans Guild. They make beautiful figures. But to support them, you've got to mess, and you got to have IPA alcohol to rinse this stuff in, and you got to be used to a pretty high failure rate. But these, I should have snipped these while it was still soft, because now it's really tough to get these off of here. Now you can trim them off with a Dremel tool, but don't breathe the dust in because it'll really harm your health. There are some drawbacks to 3D printing. I understand it's the latest craze, and there are some enormous potential upside benefits to it. But there's definitely some drawbacks for me as a consumer. One of them is this extreme fragileness of everything. This guy, spear broke off. If you drop them, they're shattered. They have no weight to them. They're a bit tricky, but you can. The nice thing is you can scale them. Like this figure is a little bit chunky for me, so I scale it down to 90%. And what do you know? I'm going to scale it down to 90% and have it the same size. But I've kind of made up my mind that I don't really want an army of these. They just, it's a lot of work, and they snap and break too much for me. And this is another thing, is you're going to have a lot of defects. For something like 15mm 40K, yes, the resin is the way to go, because you're not going to get it without resin. So this is a battle wagon that I'm doing for a 15mm 40K, and you can see that it lifted off the build plate, and then this entire side just rolled right up on it. So there's some issues with 3D printing. What 3D printing is good for me, I'm sizing up bulk. I'm trying to figure out what size to make figures. And I decided that this is the settings that I'm going to use. About as close as I can get it. This is the bulk I'm going to use. You do have to exaggerate the shape a lot. I mean, these are, what's that? Well, one of those pop stars or whatever. This is like pop star physique. This wasn't bad. 1993. But it gives me something to study, something to look at, and something to strive for. I just wanted to share with you some history, walk down. Oh my gosh, I guess it's been 30 years? Yeah, 30 years of plastics and their progression. And I have to say that technically their progression is mind-blowing. It really, really is. And I mean, there's a significant cost increase. These guys here at $10 for 60 figures. I don't think we'll ever see that again. All right, thanks for watching. Have a good one.